The flames danced across the prairie like vengeful spirits, and Genevieve Lawson could only watch in mute horror as the wagon train she'd been traveling with vanished into the distance, leaving her behind in the chaos of shouted orders and thundering hooves. The year was 1872, and the Kansas Territory was an unforgiving place for a woman alone, especially with a wildfire bearing down upon her. The hem of her dress was already singed, her lungs burning with each desperate breath of smoke-filled air. She'd stumbled when jumping from the wagon, twisting her ankle, and now found herself abandoned sacrifice to save the others from the rapidly advancing inferno. Her family's wagon had been at the rear of the train, and in the panic, no one had noticed she wasn't aboard. "Help!" She screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of the flames that consumed the tall grass with terrifying speed. The horizon glowed orange in every direction, heat pressing against her face like a physical force. Tears streamed down her ash-streaked face as she limped toward what looked like a small depression in the earth, her only hope for survival. 21 years on this earth, and this was to be her end alone on the prairie, consumed by fire. The thunder of hooves made her turn, expecting to see some wild creature fleeing the flames. Instead, a dark horse emerged from a veil of smoke, a lone rider atop it. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a bandana covering his nose and mouth against the smoke. "Take my hand," he shouted, reaching down toward her without slowing his mount. Genevieve didn't hesitate. With her last reserves of strength, she stretched upward, felt his strong grip close around her wrist, and then she was airborne, pulled across the saddle before him. Her ankle screamed in protest, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief of rescue. "Hold tight." His voice was deep and commanding near her ear as he secured one arm around her waist. She clutched at his shirt, at the saddle horn, at anything she could grab as the horse wheeled and galloped directly toward what appeared to be the thinnest part of the fire line. "We can't make it through," she cried. "Trust me," was all he said before digging his heels into the horse's sides. The stallion responded, gathering its powerful muscles beneath them and surging forward. Genevieve squeezed her eyes shut as they plunged toward the wall of flames. Heat enveloped them, searing her exposed skin. She felt the horse leap, heard its panicked whinny, and then suddenly the air was cooler, the roaring slightly more distant. They had made it through. The rider didn't slow, keeping the horse at a full gallop away from the fire. Only when they reached a small creek did he finally pull back on the reins, allowing the animal to slow to a trot and then wade into the shallow water. "Are you hurt?" he asked, lowering the bandana from his face. Genevieve turned as best she could to look at him, and found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and wind, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the edges of his hat. "My ankle," she managed, suddenly aware of how tightly she was clinging to him. "I think I sprained it when I fell from the wagon," he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "We'll need to keep riding. That fire will jump the creek soon enough." His gaze swept over the horizon. "I'm Isaiah Hayes." "Most folks call me Ike." "Genevieve Lawson," she replied, her voice hoarse from smoke. "My family's wagon train, they left without me." Something darkened in his expression. "What kind of people leave someone behind in a prairie fire?" "It was chaos," she defended, though part of her wondered the same thing. "My uncle's the wagon master. When he discovers I'm missing, he'll come looking." "Not tonight, he won't," Ike said grimly, urging his horse up the bank of the creek. "We need to get to higher ground, away from the fire's path." As they rode away from the creek, Genevieve could see the full expanse of the prairie fire behind them. It stretched across the horizon like a living thing, devouring everything in its path. The land before them was mostly open plains with occasional rocky outcroppings and copses of trees in the distance. "Where are we going?" she asked, shifting uncomfortably across the saddle. "I've got a cabin about 20 miles northeast of here," Ike answered, adjusting his hold on her to make her more secure. "We'll ride through the night. It's not safe to stop until we're well clear of the fire's path. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that mirrored the flames behind them. Despite her predicament, Genevieve couldn't help but notice how her rescuer's strong arm held her firmly, his body warm against hers in the cooling evening air. "Are you a rancher?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the distant roar of the fire. "Of sorts," he replied. "I run cattle on a small spread, nothing fancy. Used to be a scout for the army before that." As darkness fell, the only light came from the stars overhead and the ominous glow of the fire at their backs. Ike rode steadily, occasionally murmuring encouragement to his horse. Genevieve found herself drifting in and out of consciousness, exhaustion and the rhythmic motion of the horse conspiring to lull her despite her discomfort. She awakened fully when Ike gently shook her shoulder. "Stay with me, Miss Lawson. It's not safe to sleep in the saddle." "I'm sorry," she murmured, straightening. "And please call me Genevieve." "Genevieve," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "Tell me about this wagon train. Where were you headed?" "Oregon," she replied. "My father died last year and my mother remarried. My new stepfather and uncle convinced us all to head west for a fresh start. That's a long journey. It was supposed to be our chance at a better life," she said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice, though being left behind to burn wasn't part of the plan. She felt rather than saw his slight smile in the darkness. "Lucky I was out checking on strays." "Yes," she agreed softly. "Very lucky." They rode in silence for a while longer, the land growing more rugged around them. The prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. The air cooled considerably as the night deepened. "Are you cold?" Ike asked when he felt her shiver. "A little," Genevieve admitted. Without hesitation, he pulled his coat from behind the saddle and draped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering briefly before returning to the reins. "Thank you," she said, pulling it tight around her. It smelled of leather, horses, and a scent uniquely his. "You're being very kind to a stranger." "Out here, kindness isn't optional," Ike replied. "It's survival." Around midnight, they stopped briefly by a small spring to allow the horse to drink and rest. Ike helped Genevieve down, supporting her weight as she tested her injured ankle. "It's not as bad as I feared," she said, though it still throbbed painfully. Ike knelt to examine it, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so rough and work-worn. "Swollen but not broken. We'll wrap it properly when we get to the cabin." He offered her his canteen and she drank gratefully, realizing how parched she was. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and despite her exhaustion, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. "We should keep moving," Ike said, his voice suddenly gruff. "The horse has rested enough." He lifted her back onto the saddle with ease as if she weighed nothing at all. This time, he positioned her more comfortably, sideways across his lap. As they continued their journey, Genevieve found herself leaning against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about your home," she requested, fighting fatigue. "Not much to tell," he said. "Built the cabin myself 3 years ago. Got about 50 head of cattle, 2 good horses including this one, and enough land to keep to myself." "Do you like being alone?" she asked. There was a long pause before he answered. "Never really thought about it, it's just how things are." Genevieve considered this. Her life had always been filled with people, family, neighbors, church gatherings. The idea of such solitude was both frightening and oddly appealing. "What will you do about your family?" Ike asked eventually. It was a question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know. The wagon train will continue west. I suppose once my ankle heals I could try to catch up, or I could start over somewhere else," she finished. The idea had been forming in her mind since the moment she watched the wagons disappear, leaving her to die. Something had broken in her, then trust, perhaps, or the blind obedience that had characterized her life thus far. Ike didn't comment, but she felt him nod slightly. The remainder of their night journey passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of nature and their horses' steady hoofbeats. By the time the first light of dawn streaked the eastern sky, Genevieve had learned the contours of Ike's chest and shoulders against her cheek, had memorized the rhythm of his breathing. "There it is," Ike said as they crested a hill. Below them sat a modest cabin nestled against a stand of trees, a small corral to one side and a creek winding nearby. Smoke from a recently banked fire curled from the chimney. "Someone's there," Genevieve observed with alarm. "My neighbor, Tom Wilson, looks after the place when I'm away," Ike explained. "Good man. Probably wondering where I've been." As they approached, an older man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the cabin, squinting at them in surprise. "Ike," he called, was getting worried. "Who's your companion?" "Refugee from that prairie fire to the southwest," Ike replied as he guided his horse into the yard. "Tom, this is Miss Genevieve Lawson. Genevieve, Tom Wilson." Tom's weathered face creased with concern. "Prairie fire, bad one." "Bad enough," Ike confirmed, dismounting before carefully lifting Genevieve down. She winced as her injured ankle took even the slightest weight. "She needs tending too." "I'll take care of the horse," Tom offered. "You get her inside." Without warning, Ike swept Genevieve into his arms, carrying her toward the cabin door. She gasped in surprise, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not on that ankle you can't," he replied, nudging the door open with his foot. The cabin's interior was simple but neat, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a cook stove, and what appeared to be two small bedrooms off to one side. Ike carried her to a sturdy rocking chair near the stove and set her down gently. "I'll fetch some water for that ankle," he said, moving to a bucket near the door. Genevieve took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more closely. Despite its rustic nature, the cabin had a certain homey quality hand-carved furniture, shelves lined with books, a colorful quilt on the back of a small sofa. It wasn't at all what she'd expected from a bachelor cowboy's dwelling. Ike returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. He knelt before her and carefully removed her boot and torn stocking. His hands were gentle as he bathed the swollen ankle. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. You saved my life." He glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she replied. "You did." Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding. Then he returned his attention to her injury, wrapping it skillfully in a clean bandage. Tom entered, bringing a gust of cool morning air with him. "Horse is settled." "That fire's put a lot of smoke in the air, even from here. Any danger to us?" Ike asked. "Don't think so. Wind's shifting north, should blow past without coming close." Tom looked at Genevieve. "You must be hungry, miss. I can fix up some breakfast before I head back to my place." "That would be wonderful," Genevieve said, suddenly aware of her empty stomach. "But please don't trouble yourself." "No trouble," Tom insisted, already moving to the stove. "Been keeping the fire going anyway." While Tom prepared a simple meal of cornmeal mush and dried apple slices, Ike fetched a blanket and draped it over Genevieve's lap. The small kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "What's the nearest town?" she asked, trying to gather her thoughts about what to do next. "Cedar Springs," Ike replied. "About 15 miles east. Small place, but they've got a general store, smithy, even a small church." "And a telegraph office," Tom added, stirring the pot on the stove. "If you're looking to send word to your people." Were they her people anymore? The question nagged at Genevieve as she ate the simple breakfast. The wagon train would be miles away by now. Her mother would be distraught, but her stepfather had never shown much interest in her welfare. As for her uncle, leaving her behind spoke volumes about his priorities. "I think," she said slowly, "I need time to consider my options. You're welcome to stay here until your ankle heals," Ike offered, surprising himself with the invitation. Tom raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I couldn't impose," Genevieve protested. "It's not an imposition," Ike said firmly. "I've got the space and you need time to recover." After breakfast, Tom took his leave, promising to return the next day with some supplies and to check on them. Once alone, an awkward silence fell between Ike and Genevieve. "You should rest," Ike said eventually. "You can take my bed. I'll use the extra room, it's small, but it'll do." "I can't take your bed," she objected. "You can and you will," he replied with a hint of a smile. "I've slept on worse than a narrow cot." Too exhausted to argue further, Genevieve allowed him to help her to the larger of the two bedrooms. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt that looked well used but clean. "Thank you," she said again as he left her at the doorway. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," he said simply before closing the door. Alone for the first time since her rescue, Genevieve sank onto the bed, the events of the past day catching up with her in a rush of emotion. She wept quietly for the fear she had endured, for the abandonment, and for the uncertain future that now lay before her. When she finally lay down, sleep claimed her immediately. She dreamed of fire and galloping horses, and of strong arms holding her safe through the darkness. Genevieve awoke disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings momentarily confusing her. Sunlight streamed through a small window, and the sound of chopping wood came from outside. Her ankle throbbed dully as she sat up, but the rest had done her good. A dress was laid across the foot of the bed, simple, calico, and clearly well worn but clean. She realized with embarrassment that her own clothing was filthy with soot and ash. After washing with water from a basin on the small table by the bed, she changed quickly, noting that while the dress was a bit large, it would serve. Using the wall for support, she made her way to the main room. Through the window, she could see Ike splitting logs, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. She watched for a moment, struck by the fluid strength in his movements. The door opened suddenly, and Ike entered, stopping short when he saw her standing there. "You're up." "How's the ankle?" "Better," she said, feeling oddly shy. "Thank you for the dress." "It belonged to my sister," he explained, setting down an armload of firewood. "She lived with me for a while before she got married and moved to California." "It fits well enough," Genevieve said. "I appreciate the loan." Ike nodded, seeming uncomfortable. "Are you hungry? It's past midday already." "I can help cook," she offered. "I'm not completely helpless." A smile touched his lips. "Never thought you were." They prepared a simple meal together, moving around the small kitchen area with surprising ease. Genevieve found herself relaxing in his presence, his quiet competence reassuring. Over the meal, they spoke of practical matters, how long her ankle might take to heal, what supplies they might need from town. "I have some money," Genevieve said. "In my boot, not much, but enough to pay for my keep until I decide what to do." "Keep your money," Ike said firmly. "You'll need it more than I will." "I don't want charity," she insisted. His blue eyes met hers directly. "It's not charity, Genevieve, it's neighborliness." "We're hardly neighbors," she pointed out. "Maybe not," he conceded, "but I'd like to think we're friends." The word hung between them, simple yet significant. Genevieve found herself smiling. "Yes, I'd like that too." In the days that followed, they fell into an easy routine. Ike would handle the outdoor chores in the morning while Genevieve managed the cabin, her mobility improving each day. In the afternoons, he would often sit with her on the small porch, telling her about the land, the weather patterns, the wildlife. She learned that he had fought in the Civil War, had wandered westward afterward seeking peace, and had eventually saved enough from his Army Scout days to buy this small ranch. He spoke little of his family beyond mentioning his sister occasionally, and Genevieve didn't press. In turn, she told him about growing up in Missouri, about her father's death from pneumonia, about her mother's hasty remarriage to a man who saw the Oregon Territory as a land of opportunity. "I never wanted to go west," she admitted one evening as they watched the sunset. "But I couldn't let my mother go alone with him." "And now," Ike asked. Genevieve considered the question. "Now I'm not sure what I want. Everything's changed so quickly." A week passed, then two. Tom Wilson visited regularly, bringing supplies and news from town. Through him, Genevieve sent a telegram to her mother, simply stating that she had survived the fire and was safe, but not specifying where or with whom. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet. As her ankle healed, Genevieve began accompanying Ike on short walks around the property. He showed her the creek where he fished, the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, the hilltop where one could see for miles in all directions. It was on one such walk that their relationship shifted. They had climbed to the hilltop, Ike's hand supportive at her elbow, when a sudden spring shower caught them by surprise. They ran for the shelter of a large oak, laughing as the rain plastered their hair to their faces. Under the tree's broad canopy, they stood close, catching their breath. Raindrops glistened on Genevieve's eyelashes, and without thinking, Ike reached out to brush them away. His hand lingered against her cheek. "Genevieve," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Yes." Instead of speaking, he lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened as Genevieve's arms wound around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. Ike rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't bring you here with any expectations," he said earnestly. "I know," she assured him. "That's part of why I'm falling in love with you." The words slipped out before she could consider them, but once spoken, she knew they were true. This quiet, honorable man who had saved her life had also awakened feelings she'd never experienced before. Ike's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. "I thought it was just me," he confessed. "I've been fighting it since that first night when you fell asleep against my chest as we rode." They kissed again, more passionately this time, the rain forgotten as they held each other beneath the sheltering oak. Their return to the cabin was filled with shy glances and brushing hands, both acutely aware of the change between them. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Ike spoke of the future. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "The town's growing, they need a schoolteacher." Genevieve looked at him questioningly. "Are you suggesting I apply for the position if you wanted to stay in these parts?" he said, suddenly intensely interested in the fire. "It would be a respectable position. The town would welcome you." "And you?" she asked softly. "Would you welcome me staying?" Ike met her gaze then, all his feelings plain in his eyes. "More than anything. But I won't pressure you. If you decide to rejoin your family or start fresh somewhere else, I'll understand. What if I wanted to start fresh here?" She moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "With you," hope bloomed in his expression, "you hardly know me." "I know enough," Genevieve said firmly. "I know you're a man who rides into fire to save a stranger. I know you're kind and honest and hardworking. I know I feel more at home in this cabin than I ever did in my stepfather's house." Ike brought her hand to his lips, kissing it reverently. "I never thought I'd find someone willing to share this life. It's not easy out here." "I'm stronger than I look," she reminded him. "And I'm willing to learn what I don't know." The following week brought a reply to Genevieve's telegram. Her mother expressed relief at her survival, but informed her that the wagon train would not turn back. She was welcome to rejoin them when they reached Oregon if she could make the journey. "They're really not coming back for me," Genevieve said, reading the message again. Though she had expected this response, the confirmation still stung. Ike's hand settled warmly on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "Their choice has made mine easier." That Sunday, Ike took Genevieve to Cedar Springs for church services. The small community welcomed her warmly, especially after hearing how she had been rescued from the Prairie fire. The school board members, upon learning of her education, immediately expressed interest in having her teach at the town's one-room schoolhouse. "See," Ike murmured as they rode home afterward. "I told you they'd welcome you. It feels right," Genevieve admitted. "Like this is where I was meant to be all along." As spring turned to summer, Genevieve settled fully into life in Cedar Springs. She took the teaching position, riding to town each morning on a gentle mare Ike had purchased for her. The children adored her, and she found fulfillment in shaping young minds. Ike's small ranch prospered as well. With Genevieve's encouragement, he expanded his herd and built a larger corral. Together, they planted a vegetable garden behind the cabin, and Genevieve added feminine touches to the interior curtains at the windows, wildflowers in mason jars, her own handwork beside his sister's quilt. They were married in August, in a simple ceremony at the Cedar Springs Church. Tom Wilson stood as Ike's best man, and the schoolchildren formed an honor guard, throwing flower petals as the newlyweds emerged into the sunlight. "Mrs. Hayes," Ike whispered as he helped her onto his horse, just as he had that fateful night. "Ready to ride home with you?" "Always," Genevieve replied, settling into the now familiar position before him in the saddle. As they rode away from the church, cheers and well wishes following them, Genevieve leaned back against her husband's chest. The prairie stretched around them, golden in the late summer light, so different from the inferno that had brought them together. "I never thought I'd be grateful for a prairie fire," she mused. Ike's arms tightened around her. "Life has a strange way of leading us where we need to go, even when the path seems frightening." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been checking strays that night?" she asked. "I try not to," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are too painful to contemplate, even as possibilities." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, content in each other's company. The future stretched before them like the open prairie vast, sometimes challenging, but full of promise and beauty for those willing to brave its uncertainties. "Race you home," Genevieve suggested with a mischievous smile, remembering their wild ride through the flames. Ike laughed, the sound carrying across the open grassland. "Hold tight then," he said, spurring the horse to a gallop, and just as she had on that first night, Genevieve held tight to the man who had become her salvation, her love, her future. They flew across the prairie together, leaving the past behind and racing toward all the tomorrows that awaited them at journey's end. As autumn painted the prairie in rich hues of gold and copper, Genevieve and Ike settled into the rhythms of married life. Their cabin, once a bachelor's simple dwelling, had transformed into a true home. On cool evenings, they would sit before the fire, Genevieve often reading aloud from one of Ike's books while he cleaned his tack or carved small wooden figures, a hobby she had discovered he enjoyed. By the following spring, Genevieve had news to share. Standing in the doorway of the cabin as Ike returned from checking the new calves, she watched him dismount with the easy grace that still made her heart skip a beat. "How are the little ones?" she called. "Thriving," he answered with a smile, crossing the yard to her. "All 17 accounted for and healthy." "Good," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach, "because we'll have another little one to care for come winter." Ike's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "A baby, you're certain?" Genevieve nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Ike swept her into his arms, spinning her in a circle of pure joy before setting her carefully back on her feet. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed, cradling her face in his calloused hands. "Nor I," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Word spread quickly through Cedar Springs about the coming Hayes baby. The women of the town organized a quilting bee, creating a beautiful blanket from scraps contributed by each family. Tom Wilson, who had become like family to them, built a cradle of polished pine. As Genevieve's body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Ike treated her with such tender care that she sometimes teased him about it. "I'm having a baby, not turning into glass," she said one evening as he insisted on carrying a bucket of water she could have managed herself. "Humor me," he replied with a grin. "I've waited too long for this happiness to take any chances with it." In December, as snow blanketed the prairie, their daughter came into the world after a long but uncomplicated labor. They named her Isabella Rose Hayes, and she had her father's startling blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. "She's perfect," Ike whispered, holding his daughter for the first time, his usually steady hands trembling slightly. She is, Genevieve agreed, exhausted but radiant. Our prairie rose, born from the ashes of that fire. As Isabella grew, so did the Hayes Ranch. With careful management and hard work, Ike was able to purchase adjacent land when it became available. Genevieve continued teaching, often with baby Isabella in a cradle beside her desk. The children loved having the infant in the classroom, and more than one young girl declared she wanted to be a teacher and a mother just like Mrs. Hayes. 3 years after Isabella's birth, they welcomed a son, Thomas Isaiah Hayes, named for Tom Wilson and his father. Their family complete, Genevieve and Ike faced the challenges of ranch life with the same determination and partnership that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. There were difficult times, drought years when the cattle grew thin and the garden withered, a harsh winter when Ike fell ill with pneumonia, and Genevieve nursed him back to health while caring for 2 small children, the season when grasshoppers devastated crops throughout the region. Yet through it all, their love remained steadfast. Each evening, no matter how trying the day had been, they found moments to reconnect, a touch, a shared glance, quiet words exchanged after the children were asleep. "Do you ever regret it?" Ike asked once, during a particularly difficult season. "Staying here instead of continuing to Oregon?" Genevieve looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Even when the roof leaks and the well runs low and the children are feverish all at once," he pressed, needing reassurance. She took his face in her hands, making him meet her gaze. "Especially then, because I face it all with you." As the years passed, Cedar Springs grew from a tiny settlement to a proper town. A railway spur brought increased trade and new settlers. The one-room schoolhouse expanded to 3 rooms, with Genevieve serving as headmistress. Ike's expertise with cattle made him a respected figure among the ranchers of the region. Isabella grew into a thoughtful young woman with her mother's love of books and her father's affinity for the land. Young Tom became his father's shadow, learning the ways of ranching from his earliest days. On the 20th anniversary of the Prairie fire that had brought them together, Ike surprised Genevieve with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children, engraved with the words from the flames, "Love endures." "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears in her eyes as he fastened it around her neck. "Not half as beautiful as the life we've built," he replied, drawing her close. Standing on the porch of the home they had created together, watching their children tend to evening chores, Genevieve reflected on the strange twist of fate that had left her alone beside a prairie fire so many years ago. What had seemed like abandonment had instead been the beginning of a journey more fulfilling than any she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Ike asked, his arm around her waist. "How sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she answered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And how grateful I am that you pulled me into your saddle that night. Best decision I ever made," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the sun set over their land, painting the prairie in the same fiery hues that had brought them together, Genevieve and Ike Hayes stood wrapped in each other's arms, their love as enduring as the land itself, tested by fire, strengthened by trials, and burning steady through all the seasons of their lives.